Going to go through quickly a little bit about my history and who I am. So basically, my name is Claussen. I have done video game art for quite some time now. I think I started 13 years ago now, and the last years I've been working more as an art director slash mentor, and now I moved over to do the art program, being head of art program here at Vertex School. So seeing a little bit over the classes and stuff like that, and updating the content. And during my time, I've tried a little bit of everything. I've done indie, so I started indie, worked on a game together with friends, but then always worked on my own stuff on the side. And I kind of started stylized, but I was always wanting to do realism basically on the side. So Naughty Dog, like a lot of people, were my big inspiration, and I did kind of that type of art on the side. And then I jumped over to Starbreeze, where I did an art test. We can see it here, and worked on Walking Dead. And during that time, I was keep doing my portfolio pieces. I felt like it was a nice outlet to be able to do your own stuff, basically, when you are not at work, and because you have always very kind of specific things you need to do at work, but experimentation can always happen at home. So keep harnessing and learning environment art during this time. Moved over a little bit to vegetation because I got a call from Ubisoft after some time, and they asked if I was interested to do vegetation. So I got that gig after doing an art test and a couple of interviews. So I kind of start learning that a little bit before my time started there also. And then I moved over to Ubisoft here in Stockholm. I worked on Avatar and Division. So I worked as a vegetation artist, more of a specialized role. But I helped out on Division and some unannounced games also. And then usually when you are a specialist, you of course focus on that specialization. So that was vegetation, but you always kind of jump over and help out. So I did a little bit environment artwork, prop artwork, and a little bit lighting also. But same here during that time, kept building scenes. I built a quite big scene, and it was my Great Hall. Took some quite time because it was a full playable environment. But then I also started to paint a lot on my side, so doing concept art. Yes, this recording will be available. I think it's going to be sent out, Andrew, if I'm correct there. But yeah, started to paint, basically doing paintable, like painterly textures, but also kind of just moving over to like concept art in general. And then I got the opportunity to jump on a new startup, which was Fall Damage. They were ex-DICE people that wanted to do a competitive shooter. And that felt very exciting, I felt like. It was a very small team, around 25 people, I think, when I joined. And I got the chance to be together with a couple of artists and kind of build up the studio together and the art style and all the tech. So very exciting, building everything from ground and trying to achieve quite high fidelity for a small studio. And in the beginning, I was a lead environment artist, and then I moved over to art direction. And during this time, I also joined Vertex School. So I've been at Vertex School for 5 years in October. So quite soon is my 5 years anniversary. It's end of October, I think. And what I did a lot during that time was usually being quite inspired by all the other artists, students. I got a little bit envy when they did their portfolio scenes. I always jumped on and built my own during the time of the courses, basically. Here we have 3 pieces, and I actually have one new I haven't added here. And that's a little bit about me. I want to jump kind of quickly over to modularity because that's going to be the main focus of this presentation. I'm going to jump over to that slide. I'm going to jump into slideshow. So I want to talk a little bit about modularity in video games and what it means. And for me, I like the comparison to Lego because it's a very kind of common thing that we all have touched on or seen. And the idea of just being able to build something with a couple of pieces to create something that assembles a house. So with a couple of pieces, we can create something. And we can reuse the pieces for other things. So it's a very flexible workflow. So why do we use modularity in video games? The first thing is it reduces cost. It makes it faster to build. We can create more buildings or objects faster because we can assemble them together, and we can also have them on a lower cost in terms of performance. Maintenance, it's easier to iterate and fix stuff. So if we have a wall with a window and we want to kind of clean that up and fix it, we can very easily fix that window, and all the pieces that had that window will be updated in the game. It's a very fast way of fixing stuff that might have gone broken and stuff like that. And then scalability, if we have a very set workflow in our modularity, we can very easily update and change things. So let's say we have a town that has gone completely broken in the DLC, like it exploded. We can take all the buildings, create broken versions of them, and they will kind of fit together again, basically. And then, like I said, performance. Modularity can really help with performance also in terms of we can call much easier. And what the calling means is basically that when you see a rendered world, of course, you don't want to see everything behind you, like as a player. That would cost a lot of performance. What usually happens in the background without us seeing is that things are disappearing basically behind you. And if we're cutting up everything into pieces, more pieces can disappear. Because if the whole world would be one piece, wherever we look, they would still render everything. So that's also one of the reasons we use modularity. And I think usually when we think of modularity, we think of like kit pieces in architecture. But I like to think of modularity in four kind of categories. So the first one is, of course, architectural kits. And it's probably the one we see the most. Here we have one from Expedition 33. And here's a very good example where we can build a bunch of different buildings with existing pieces. So I want to kind of show that with an example here. Like this building can feel quite intimidating to build, quite large. But when cutting it down, we don't need that many pieces to build this whole building, basically. So these pieces would basically create the whole building. And here is a video I really like that shows kind of modularity from Assassin's Creed Shadows. And we can see the artist can kind of pack together. It's basically like Lego. We can kind of place pieces that are repeating. And I think later we also see on a wall here how we can change a wall piece. So we let this play through a little bit. And something you might see is that the pieces feel quite similar in size. And And that makes it easy to kind of switch them out and stuff like that. I think that where it shows the wall is a different video. I'm gonna pick that up later after the presentation. But yeah, it's basically, this is kind of like how all the buildings are being built in these big worlds, or else it would take a long time to build kind of like these uniquely. Then I want to talk a little bit about organic assets. So here we have from Last of Us. So when we build the mountains, caves, and stuff like that, we also use modularity. So we tend to always kind of put this together in terms of sizes. So still thinking of kind of big pieces, medium pieces, and small pieces to keep a consistency in something we call pixel. So keeping the resolution of the texture equally always, but also the detail. Like if we would scale down this and up, we would kind of create quite weird kind of details from the sculpts and stuff like that. So we usually build like bigger pieces, medium pieces, and small pieces, and then we just bunch them together. And with really good rock sculpting, you can create with quite few pieces a lot of different mountain and cliff sides. So here we have another example from Indiana Jones, where it's more of a flat piece that's creating kind of this whole cave system. And here I missed to add this, but this is basically from the artist who made a plugin called Mesh Blend in Unreal. And that plugin is basically just making everything, all the seams kind of get smoothed out. But I think this video shows really well kind of like how we work with these pieces when it's cliff sides and stuff like that. We basically just put them into each other, and they create different silhouettes and shapes. And then we have trim sheets. So I think trim sheets can also be thought of in modularity. Here we see an example where different pieces can kind of create details that are, of course, repeating, but together it looks very nice, like repeating pieces from a texture sheet. And this is a very common thing to do in sci-fi games, but we do it also more towards other games now. But I really like this example. So the question came up, what is a trim sheet? So we have a trim sheet here, basically. There's a tiling texture from left to right, usually. And these specifically is decal pieces, basically. So they are basically just floating on top of the meshes here. So all of these small details are basically just floating above the mesh. And that way we don't have to uniquely bake everything. We can just hover it over basically the mesh and be much more flexible and fast. And a really good example of that is this scene, which is a little bit older now. So I think this was made probably like 10 years ago by Tor Frick. And this whole environment was built with just one texture, which is very impressive. And it's more of a case study rather than something you might do in a game. But it really shows if you're really smart with modularity, both in texture work, but also in mesh work, you can create kind of like a whole environment with very few assets. And then the last one would be prop kits. So to create variation in props, we can also think modularity. So here we have a good example of a ladder. If we want this ladder to have a broken version, maybe for gameplay reasons, we want the player not to be able to enter that specific spot, we have a broken version on the bottom here. And I really like these examples are also from Kena, where the same kind of like wood bake texture creates a bunch of different assets that that shares basically just two textures here. So now I want to talk about like the whole kind of foundation of modularity in terms of architecture, and that's going to be what we are focusing on now, like building kit pieces. So the first thing I want to talk about is metrics. So usually we set a metric, so a size, when we work in a game. And this might vary a little bit, but I would say this is probably the most common one, where we want things to be quite flat in value. So these are centimeters. So we have 100 centimeters, 200 centimeters, 400, 6, and 800. We can think it as meters also, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 1, 2, 4, 6, 8. And the reason why we do this, for example, towards Unreal, is that 1 unit on the grid is 1 centimeter, and 100 units is 1 meter. And we're going to see later in the demo why this is so effective when we work. But something I like to think of is like the grid rules. So that's a little bit like how is the grid set up in terms of numbers. So I think when it kind of goes up, it's ×2, and when it goes down, it's kind of like just halving. So if we start at 1 meter and go down, we go to 50 centimeters, and then 25 centimeters, 12.5, 6.2, and the other way around we go up. And this is going to be more clear later when we jump into Maya and show it. But we can look at it here in Maya. So basically, we go down in grid size here. And here I just have a quick example of a building where we have these pieces, and we can see they are lining up with the grid. And these few pieces basically creating this building. And I want to talk a little bit, we talked about kind of like why we use it. So efficiency, we can longevity and flexibility. But there is some cons. We can always kind of work around this, but they can be good to know about. I would say one is that it's very easy that it becomes repetitive. It's quite clear sometimes when too much only quick kit has been worked and been added. So we try to blend that always with like unique assets and stuff like that. And that might be hero props that are being kind of built for a longer time. Or we blend it with kind of like more assets, basically. So a wall, for example, of a building might be blended with like props and stuff like that, or decals. I would say also if we are not consistent with our rules, it's very easy that it can break. So it's very important that everyone is aligned with kind of the rules of the modularity of the game we're working on, or else things are not going to fit together when we are importing them and working with them. And then there is also the risk of maybe thinking too modular, too small, we're getting too many pieces to work with, and it becomes very cumbersome to work with. And then before we end the presentation, I want to just give some links here. I'm probably going to post these in the mail also, so they are easy to get to. The first one, I'm going to show a little bit what it is, but it's basically a collection I have gathered on ArtStation that shows a bunch of different examples from video games, but also personal projects, good modularity. So it's basically a collection of really good information on ArtStation. And then I've done a YouTube collection of a playlist of more videos on modularity. I think it's always good to get information from different places. And here I added a couple of videos that whoever wants to see a little bit more about it can watch. And lastly, a really good video from Nate he works on the new Star Wars game, I think, and at Respawn, I think. And he did a really good video on grid and texture density, that especially the grids workflow, that explains a little bit also how we work in grid. This one is $1, so it has a cost to it, but the other ones are free. So let's jump to the collection. I'm going to just show that quickly. So here we have that collection. And here we can see a bunch of different examples of HIT workflow in the industry. So all of these buildings are being built by a bunch of pieces, basically. And one thing I would say with ArtStation is that usually these things can be a little bit hidden by having to scroll sometimes. So usually the good stuff is always hidden in the kind of bottom of the posts. But yeah, I would definitely check out kind of like all of these posts. It gives a good understanding kind of like how buildings are being assembled in video games. So here we can see a house wall, for example. Is there any questions so far? Then I would say we can jump a little bit to the demo. So before the class here, I went and modeled a scene. Some of you might recognize this scene. I'm gonna grab my reference. So I built the entrance of Spirit of the Way here. And I'm going to talk a little bit how I would exactly. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit how I did the block out, like the calculation. I did a talk a couple of weeks ago where I went through a little bit how I do block outs. So I felt like we would not have time to do both the block out and the kit pieces, but I'm going to still show a little bit my thought into building this before we move over to the modularity. So great question. How using modular kits, how important is it to build using grid to avoid overlapping geo? So I would say it's going to just help you more to just kind of get used to grid snapping, because it's going to quite be more effectful, I would say. Having everything snap makes it much easier to kind of like build without kind of like sea fighting and stuff like that. So if you have overlapping geo, you might run into that you get sea fighting, and that's when two meshes are intersecting and flickering. I would say also like it has to do with a little bit like the co-working between you and the design team. So level designers who are usually building the environment's playing field, like they decide how to move around in environments, stuff like that. They usually set up a quite planned out playing field with clear measurements, both in terms of being able to kind of calculate easier. For example, if we talk about like a competitive shooter, how long does it take to get to the middle of the map from both sides? That's much easier to calculate if everything is kind of on the grid and based on meters, for example. So the co-work between that, like they doing the block out and you taking that block out and keeping the consistency that they set, is quite important, I would say. But then, of course, every studio would do different amount of modularity, I would say. So there's never kind of like a set rule. Like an example I have from Walking Dead is that some things there were quite non-modularity, but that was more, I would say, kind of like that things needed just to be done rather than maybe the best approach, I would say. So like some of the buildings there were just completed buildings, basically. But yeah, let's jump into Maya. Gonna see here. So I want to talk a little bit first how I kind of went about and measured everything. So I usually like to use Photoshop for that and kind of paint out lines. And what I look for always in my reference is a character, or for example, a car can be quite nice, but here is even better. We have a character. You can see that this character here, the mom, is basically half of the roof, half of the entrance. And I would probably put this person on 150 or 160. And when we work in modularity, we kind of want to round up numbers. So let's say if we perfectly would measure this and it's 160 plus 160, so it becomes 3.2 basically. We rather kind of lower that number to a 3 instead, because then we have a little bit more a clean number basically. So that's the first thing I would do. I usually always try to figure out what size is the door. So we have a 3 here, or 300. And then I can just kind of like start using this as a ruler, basically. Of course, we can have a perspective and stuff like that that might throw us off a little bit. We always have to remember that. But we can see that 150 is up to here. And then it's almost like another half meter there. So I'm going to kind of put that on 5, basically. I always try to like round up the numbers. Now we know that up to this wall, we have 5 meters. And then, of course, we talked about like keeping the numbers in kind of equals, like 100, 200, 400s. I would say, and that comes down to like UV mapping usually to keep tiling textures not having a seam. I would say usually we try to have that number always being true when we tile from side to side. When it comes to upwards, we can kind of like cheat a little bit. For example, we might have a seam here now, but I know that we have like this to put here, basically, to hide that seam. But we don't want kind of seams of the tiling texture. So tiling texture, you can kind of see that they are not connecting. We don't want it on the wall where the player can walk and see. So these numbers we want to always have clean. So for example, this wall piece, for example, I probably want that on a clean number. So I would imagine this door is probably like 2 meters wide because the car can almost fit here. And then we have these two. So I would probably put these on 1 meter each to kind of get it to be 4 meters. So then we have this first piece, which is 4 meters on the side and 5 meters upwards. And then I'm going to just kind of repeat that with this modular piece, 4 meters and 5. Here we have another door. So I feel like for me, this door would probably be more closer to 2 meters, like a normal door. So I'm going to put that on 2. And we can kind of use our tactic here again and just kind of use the ruler. So we have kind of this going underneath here. So this red part also can be 2 meters. And then there's the roof part. I feel like it's kind of half. And I would say this comes down to a lot of eyeballing and testing. So while kind of writing these numbers down, I would test them, and then I would kind of like put them into practice, building this, seeing if it feels right, and then iterating on it. This last part I would probably put on 2 meters also. So we have a 2 meter piece, 2 meter, and all of these I'm going to kind of keep at kind of 4 meter piling on the side. So I can now just want to calculate the measurements here. So up here, it would be nice to, like this balcony, it could be nice to, the thickness here to have on a meter, maybe like here to here, basically. And then we have everything in the grid, basically. So with these calculations, we can jump into Maya. And a couple of things here. I want to talk about the grid. So right now we can see that this box fits perfectly on the grid. And I'm holding in X to snap. So it's nicely snapping. And I just want to show my grid settings. So I've set the size of the grid to 1,500. This number is usually depending on how big is the scene I'm working on. And then every line is 100 units, so 1 meter. But then, of course, it's nice if I could kind of half this. For example, if I want to do for kind of like a prop or something like that, I want to kind of get it to 1.5 meters to be able to like snap. Or let's say if I want to go like super low, but still being on the grid, I can go down here. But of course, sitting like this is a bit annoying. So I have this script here that basically does that for me. So you're going to see me kind of shortcutting, clicking this a lot, where I kind of jump between these up and down. And I have these shortcutted like this. I'm going to show that quickly. And I'm happy to share that script also in the mail later. But here we have basically these up and down. So a great question, am I using centimeter or meters as my working units? So I'm using centimeters, and that's because Unreal is kind of using that. So I kind of want them to be connected. But I kind of want to work in meters because it's an easier number. So in practice, if I need to write meters, of course, I need to write 100 to make a meter or 200. So I'm in a centimeter, but I always tend to work kind of like in meter measurements here, because each of these lines here is a meter. So I think mostly kind of like in meters, but the Maya here is set to centimeters. And something that might happen if you set it up like this, you're probably gonna see this happening when you create kind of cubes and stuff like that. And that's because they are set to be created in one equal, basically. So if I go into the option, it's basically 1, 1, 1. And that's a bit annoying, I feel like, always having to scale that up. So every object I've just set to 100 here. So it's always a meter. I would say it's probably a preference thing. Like you can kind of have meters. So here in preference, you can set to meters, but there might be things that are creating kind of like disconnects with Unreal sometimes with that. Think, for example, animations and stuff like that. I know Blender, for example, has a little bit problems when you are doing skinning with the measurement system in Blender. So I just have it on centimeters. So yeah, I can jump up and down here. So we have the blockout we saw here in Unreal. And like I showed in the other live event, I kind of always grid snap while kind of working. So I'm kind of like always almost like thinking in modularity while working. And I would say don't stress doing that. I think that comes with a lot of time. So I would say if it's hard to kind of like block out the modularity or in like grid snapping and it takes too much time, I would just kind of like just build basically so it feels right. But then when you set up the pieces, you want to clean it up. But what I can show is basically maybe the beginning here to show just example here. So I tend to always start with kind of cubes. And we said that this was 4 by 5. So we can kind of easily kind of go up to 5 here and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or we can also write up here. And then we know it's 5. And here is where it becomes quite nice being able to go down in grid here. I can very easily, if needed, I can kind of like make a door smaller, but still being on the grid. So this door right now is a meter basically. So I don't have to kind of move it over here to be able to snap. I can just half that and have it being a meter because it's 2 halves. So 2 50s becomes 100. And after a while, you don't think about it. So it becomes kind of just part of modeling to always hold in X and grid snap, basically. So we said that our wall or door was 3 meters tall and 2 meter wide. And if we bring up the reference here, it's kind of an arch. So I'm going to actually use this piece here. And what I'm holding in here is basically D like David and then V like Victor. And that makes me be able to like move around the pivot here. I use this a lot in Maya. And then I use snap to a vertex, which gives me kind of like the possibility to kind of like hold in V here and just snap this into the wall. And we can see kind of what's going to happen here now. I get the perfect arch, basically. So now I just have to kind of delete the bottom here. And holding X. So holding X and dragging down is going to snap to the grid there. And actually delete that wall. Now it looks a little bit weird And what this is basically I model on the other side. But we can just quickly go here to mesh display and do reverse. And I'm on a new computer, so all my custom shells and stuff like that is a little bit gone right now. I'm on a new Maya, basically. So I want to have that as a quick button, actually. So to make quick buttons in Maya, I need to hold in Control-Shift middle mouse. And we're going to see it appears here. So now that's a quick button. And actually, with middle mouse, I can move it around. I'm going to put it down here in custom shell. So some buttons I like to kind of have here because I kind of use this modeling toolkit, and I have some buttons here. Some things I kind of keybind. I really like to add keybinds. So for example, for export, I have a keybind. And it takes a little bit maybe time to set up keybinds, but it can really speed up work, especially with like repeating actions like exporting. I don't want to go up here or click a button. I want to just have a quick button to export. But yeah, reverse, and that's going to fix it. So let's see. Exactly, I'm using a script to subdivide, and I'm going to share that script. So I might add a video how to just set it up. So it's a script where you can kind of just do this instead of going into the grid option here and scaling. So I'm probably going to share it with a video how to set it up. That's a great question. So I got the question here about should you work with a plane when you do modularity, or should you add thickness? And I would say that's kind of like a little bit depending on the studio. So there is no hard rule there. Some prefer to kind of like have it there for a safety when it comes to not having kind of like light bleeds and stuff like that. In the latest studios I worked, the latest studio I worked in, we didn't have it. We instead built the light blockers. So instead of making everything kind of have thickness, we made everything see-through and then added like a light blocker basically in as a mesh basically for the level. So that's how we created that piece. And what I'm going to do now is kind of start cleaning this up. So you can see I'm kind of like basically building with modularity when I'm doing the block out. So everything is like probably 4 meter pieces. Some might not. So sometimes I, of course, like forget to grid snap and it's a little bit off and stuff like that. That's where this cleanup phase comes in. Now I want to kind of like do proper versions of everything. So we have the entrance. We can hide that. And let's do this piece. So it's on the grid. And when it comes to kind of like edge loops and stuff like that, I would say we can kind of clean that up here also. So I would say it can be nice if we know we're gonna vertex paint. So that's basically means we're gonna paint between different tileable textures. So for example, we might have this red plaster, and then we have a broken kind of see-through plaster. And we're gonna kind of vertex paint this. So it's basically when we can paint in between two textures in a reel. And in the name it says vertex painting. It needs vertices to work. So when doing kit pieces, it can be quite nice to create kind of equal squares, because that vertex painting, like that color information, is going to happen on these vertices. So a good practice can be to kind of like have everything being a little bit nicely set up in terms of being on equal squares. So I try to like keep these on equal squares. I'm gonna create a square up here also. So with the traditional texture workflow, do you mean like a high poly, low poly baking? Like, are you thinking like doing it paint in Painter basically? Is that what you mean? So I would say like vertex painting is basically the bread and butter of environment artwork. So if we would just use a tileable texture here, we wouldn't have any control where the damage happens, right? So if we just applied a texture that has this damage, we have very little controls. We can't paint exactly where we want. So vertex painting just opens up the possibility of really pinpointing where to be able to paint. So I kind of want to just show that quickly. So I think there is a really good post that shows vertex painting. Let's jump to I think it's this guy has. So they show a little bit vertex painting in these, I think. Might be this one. Okay, here. So here you can see down below why we use it. So Last of Us, they vertex paint inside of Maya, but this is the kind of same thing we would do in Unreal. So you can see how Jared here can really pinpoint where damage happens. So it becomes much more kind of like almost like doing Painter, like Substance Painter, but with bigger pieces basically. Because we would not be able to uniquely texture this in Painter. It would be very expensive to be able to add everything on one texture here. And then we can also always reuse these textures. So what Yaris is doing here is have different variations of this brick. See it up here. And paint between them basically. And that's what vertex painting is. I hope that explained it. Probably gonna put these here. Delete that. So I usually do that, like getting rid of the ones I've kind of like have a version of. I don't need these pieces anymore. Now we have this piece. And here we can see I've already kind of like thought of how they will be continued. So this piece needs to always be continued. So it's actually added here in the middle of the intersection there to just perfectly kind of snap underneath there. So I'm gonna grab this and we're gonna start cleaning this up. Let's look if this is on the grid, yes. And up here, this is also on the grid. You can see So if I would kind of snap like this, it would quite perfectly fit. So we can see that there might be a little bit flickering there, and that can just be that these are a little bit like off scale. So I'm gonna just show this. So what I like to do is like always kind of scale towards like this, because then it's flattening it completely and then just holding in the snap to the grid. And we can delete the inner part here. So next question is how do you decide where to put the gizmo for modular pieces? So I usually think of where will it connect with something else. So for example, I would say like wall pieces. Let's take the ones we built here. So let's see. Where did that other one end up? Like hidden somewhere in one of these groups here. I'm going to show it with these 3 pieces. I'm going to actually combine them and then separate them so they end up here in the bottom as its own group. So we could either put them in the front or back of the bottom, because these wall pieces will always meet another wall and a floor. Because then I can just hold in and drag like this, and it's going to kind of like always fit in. And I would say the important part is that the pivot is consistent. Because if we switch out these in engine and they have different pivots, they are not going to work if we just change them out by kind of like a blueprint or another solution. We always need these pivots to be always the same, basically. So for wall pieces, I put them here on the right corner. And I tend to kind of keep that consistently through everything. So I'm going to do it here also, right corner. And on this one, it's going to also be the right bottom corner. Next question is, are planes the only mesh used during kit modeling? So I would say do you mean like when kind of starting a modular piece, or what do you mean with planes, basically? Like the starting point of a model? I mean, it comes down a little bit. Like I would say, when we look at like weapons and vehicles, nowadays they use quite a lot like CAD softwares. So I would say they might not even start in Maya. They actually might start in a software called Plasticity. Like this one. So it's very depending on, and I would say like hard surface modeling, which is like weapons and vehicles, and to happen more with like CAD softwares nowadays, if it's like AAA. But if it's like, for example, maybe a simpler type of graphics, like we can still kind of box model stuff and then slowly like subdivide or subdivision model it to a car. I would say nowadays, CAD software is quite useful when it comes to like hard surface. But then when it comes to like what you wrote, door walls, windows. Like usually it's like the simpler the start is, the better, I would say. So I tend to always kind of keep just using very simple shapes and then add complexity to them slowly. Let's do this door now. So next question is, do you ever use any special duplication or mesh for duplicating elements? Could you rewrite that question, Tyler? I'm not completely sure what you mean with that. If you could word it a little bit differently. And then Chris asked, how important is it to delete interfaces? I would say like, of course, like cleaning up faces can be always nice. I would say like polygon-wise, it's not as important anymore. Like we can have those extra faces, but I would say like leaving your object clean can be quite nice. So I can see, for example, here, when I did this block out, I have this kind of weird piece here. I would probably like start cleaning that up. So I guess that was this piece. And here I can kind of subdivide and still be on the grid. And the nice thing, even with these small pieces being on the grid, it doesn't have that much to do with like grid snapping anymore. It's more like consistency. So instead of like scaling it like freely and guessing, if I just grid snap everything, I know that everything is going to kind of be consistent. I don't have to think that much when working, basically. So there was another question there. So Alexander asked, have you tried to creating your meshes directly in Unreal? Do you think it's good enough for this type of kit creation? So Unreal nowadays has a really good modeling tool. I tend to use that maybe more for blockouts because I think it's still a little bit awkward to work in, to be honest. So I would say for me, Maya is faster to work in. So that's kind of where I would build my kit pieces. But the modeling tool now in Unreal has like baking, UV mapping, everything basically. But it's a bit too awkward to do that type of modeling for me, at least. I think we can put this one also to be 4 meters instead. And here we can see it's like not really on the grid. I'm gonna put it on the grid. Snap this up here. Now we have a bit of a cleaner piece. So I might redo that. And I want to shake it together with the balcony piece here. Okay, it's on the grid. I'm gonna do. I kind of want this piece to be kind of like 3 meters and not a awkward number. But now I can kind of put it back into its spot, so it's kind of like snapping to here. And then, are you individually placing the? So I'm going to show that part. So we're going to basically split up everything now, and then we're going to take pieces, single pieces into Unreal and build everything in Unreal. And the reason why we want to do that is it comes down to the whole calling thing. So we want everything to call nicely. what we talked about, like when we look back, we don't want things to render behind us. We want to make sure that that things are always disappearing. And if we would combine everything in Maya, we would just have a combined mesh, basically. I might move this roof up. This. So I'm kind of like planning out positioning here in Maya also while working. Using the grid here also, basically. This piece, we can make it also 4 meters by 4. And then we have this roof piece. And the first thing I'm going to do is kind of just we're going to quickly just get these into engine, and then we can start detailing this a little bit. So I do separation because it's kind of like here in this big group, and I just combined, and it ends up here in the bottom. So it's just a quick way to move something out and then getting it down here. So I got the question about the grid here. So that's a plugin that I'm gonna share with you guys in the mail later. So it's basically this plugin, but I have also hotkeyed it because I don't want to sit and do this, basically. But I'm going to share it and probably add a video how to set it up also. I'm going to get rid of these pieces now. I'm going to group it and just hide it. And let's start getting stuff in because I want to show how we go about that. And then we're going to kind of like take the rest here. Now I have all these pieces that we kind of cleaned up a little bit. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just put them a little bit nicer on the grid. This one might be nice to have in the middle. So then we can scale it like this. Because this one is not going to tile. Like it's not going to be a wall piece, stuff like that. It's more of a prop. So then I kind of want it in the middle, being able to scale easier. So here the pivot would be in the bottom middle. And no, so you don't need a plugin to do the grid snapping. That's basically part of Maya here. So I'm holding in X basically for that. The whole building is going to be just these pieces. And that's the nice thing. Like when I assemble all of these pieces, I can just sit and detail these. One thing you might notice here is that I get this kind of like quite ugly flickering. I'm going to fix that by going here to camera attribute editor and just add a little bit high number here, and that's flicker disappear. Another thing I usually like to add in here also is lighting. I'm going to actually delete these to show it. Go to rendering and click these two. I'm going to scale them up. And I just click light bulb and shadows. And it just makes it a little bit nicer for me to see kind of when modeling. I see kind of like shadow here to see indications and stuff like that. I'm reading the next question here. So I would say we use it kind of across the whole playing field. So actually, I would say distance cityscapes usually are just complete buildings because they are just so kind of simple in modeling. So usually we build them as a whole piece. But this is actually more for things that are getting close to the player. Because if everything here would be combined, it would be quite taxing on the rendering. We want to kind of separate these. And what I can do is actually show what the calling is, because that's going to make this a little bit clearer. So I'm going to jump into this one. Here we have a little bit modular assets to look at. We have this building here. It's kind of contained by these pieces. Here, can you even see that I kind of like put the pivot on a kind of bad spot, so should fix that. But yeah, these pieces are basically this building. And if I am a player right now, and I just look, if I would stand just here in the game, basically. So this is actually what the player is seeing. So we're calling away kind of like all the stuff that you're not seeing. If this building would be completely built, you would render the whole building. So it makes it quite nice, like optimization wise, to not having to render the whole building always. So if we are just playing here, we're actually just rendering this. And that's called calling. So I hope that explains it a little bit. And I mean, we have seen like modularity. I see that like even in like pixel art games, we have modularity to be able to, because it also comes down to like being able to just focus on these small pieces and detail them. It's much faster than kind of like building a whole roof and kind of like detailing the whole roof. Like I just have to focus on this piece, making that nice, and it's going to update the whole roof instead of working on a giant piece, basically. So like workflow way, it's faster to iterate. So what we want to do now, I'm going to show a little bit like how we can export. The first thing is that we want to kind of delete history. So delete history is kind of like to get rid of all the kind of modeling history I have here. So you find that here, and that's just kind of like a common thing to do in Maya. History is not the best thing in Maya. It's getting better, but still kind of like always clicking delete history, and we have the shortcut here. Hold Shift D. Another thing is that some of these have kind of weird transforms right now. So when putting in these into the world of Unreal, they might break a little bit. We want to make sure that these numbers are zeroed out right now. We do that with freeze transform here. And here you can see I have a shortcut for that also. And that just zeroes out everything. So now we would just sit and maybe just export this one by one. Like if we take, for example, we start with a door here. We go to export selected. Some might wonder why I get the Windows view here. I'm going to show that quickly. I use OS native instead of Maya default, and that's just because I kind of prefer to have it there. Exactly, Andrew. I always use the game exporter. I kind of want to show exactly why we should use it, basically. This is going to be a little bit to show the problem with not using it. So let's just do a folder here that we're going to use for this building. So first off, we want to kind of set a naming convention here. So we start always with SM, stands for static mesh, wall, and I'm going to just do door. I like to write the measurements also. And the idea here is that whoever kind of reads these objects know kind of without looking what it is. So I want to write that it's 4 meters wide, 5 meters tall, and it's the first version of this. So if we would have a broken version, for example, it would be a B. And I could export that, go in here to Unreal, add a kit folder, go to our desktop, and add this in. Here in import, I think I've already done that, but I'm going to show just what I set here. So textures, I don't want to import that. Don't want to import materials. I want to kind of always set that up in Unreal. Very easy that we maybe add a lot of materials and stuff in Maya, and then we just get kind of like files we don't want here. So I rather have just the meshes being imported. I'm going to also do combine static mesh. So if we would work on objects without combining them in Maya, there is going to be combined in Unreal. So we don't have to like always combine before exporting. And then Nanite, we can use Nanite. I tend to kind of turn it off on import. And if I need to use it, I just right click, add Nanite. So we have our first piece, but the first thing we recognize here is that we're placing it, but the pivot is wrong here. Like it's not the same, right? And the reason is that the pivot between Maya and Unreal is actually set in world origin, basically. So what we're seeing is the pivot is here. So if I add this wall, for example, I'm going to do my shortcut for export. And this is going to be window. It's very easy that this starts happen and that we are fine with it and try to kind of make it work, like a bit awkwardly making them fit. But we really want to make sure that these pivots are clean. If this would be a prop, we want to kind of scale, like it would scale very, very weird, and it's very hard to like move this around. So we want to use game exporter like Andrew wrote. And in most studios, we usually have these. There is for Blender also. Usually these are kind of like set as a plugin for the studio. Because then we can set a bunch of settings that might need basically clicking. So we take away extra work. The really cool thing with this one also is that instead of like sitting and just exporting one by one, I can select everything and export this. So we are totally fine with off-topic questions. It's about Nanite and foliage creation. So with the new Unreal 5.7, they're going to add what you saw in the Witcher demo. So 5.7 is going to have it. It's going to be still experimental. So they have like 5.7 and it's going to have it. I would say my view on Nanite is that if you're starting out, I would probably just learn the fundamentals of just modeling and stuff like that. And I think like adding Nanite into the mix might just create a lot of problem solving because it's a technology that is not really defined yet. Another thing is that not every studio is using Nanite. So I feel like a little bit, if we just have work that is Nanite specific in our portfolio, we might just single out a lot of studios. So for example, my scenes in my portfolio are kind of like not using Nanite. I might now, after I think I've done maybe 10 scenes, I do a Nanite scene. I think like having like 3 Nanite scenes, I would probably like have like a more classical scene also, because there is some things that we have to rethink when we use Nanite. But it's a really cool technology and it's probably going to be standard in a couple of years. So I think being up to date and checking it out, I would always recommend. And like I said, with my next scene, I'm going to actually test out Nanite. So Jessica asked, when do you do UVs for modular pieces? So I would say I tend to always kind of like try to build as much as possible first in terms of your shapes, because I think that's the first kind of read I want to have on the piece. So I tend to like build everything quite nicely modular, like modeling everything quite detailed first and getting kind of down just the shape language of the objects. Because if things look nice with very like just simple grayscale, then I know that if I just add textures on it later, it's just going to look a little bit better. So I don't want to kind of mix UV and modeling together. But then when I'm very happy with like just everything, when it comes to like the modeling, then I move over to UVing. And we're not going to really have time to jump in too much UV modeling here, sadly. But we're going to have other live talks, and I might add something into those that talks about UVing, because I know it's a topic that has a lot of questions. So yeah, I'm going to go through the game exporter. So I'm going to actually reset my settings. We see them like you see them. So I think they're going to be sent to you, like the recordings, if you signed up for this. So they probably will be in the mail that was part of this invitation, basically. So yeah, first thing I want to set is I do export selected. And then it's just clicking move to origin. And then export multiple files. If I have a group, for example, I can export that. And then I can see actually what the object is going to be called, key cylinder 7.fbx. So I can actually add the prefix here. So I never have to add SM in every object. I can just have it resting there. And then we can copy the name we had here. And that's going to actually be set here in the outliner. So outliner is used quite a lot when we work. Also when we set collision and stuff like that. You can see now it's SM. We need to add a wall, door, 4 times 5, A. Let's set the pivot correct, and then try to export this. And then, of course, we need to set our director. So we're going to jump here to kit folder. Going to get that we already have an object called this. We're going to change it out. And now when we import, the pivot is not working. So what happened there? Let's go here, and we can see actually that the transforms are wrong. So that's why I have a quick button to freeze transforms. So if I freeze the transforms, you find that up here, freeze transforms. So setting everything on 0. I'm going to delete the history also. So we do that here, delete by history. So zeroing everything out. Try again. And now it's working here. So now we can setting the door. And something I can show here in Unreal also. I'm on a new project, but I usually set up the grid to kind of work together with Maya. So right now when I'm halving, we remember the numbers. It was like 150, 25, 12.5, 6.12 basically. We don't really have that grid snapping here in Unreal. We have it kind of 50 and 10, but everything else here is kind of a random number. So what I want to do is actually I want to go here to settings, search for grid, and I'm just going to set up this grid to kind of coexist with my Maya grid. I'm going to change that to 25, and then just half these numbers. Oops, a 5 here. And then other way up. So I'm going to do 200 times 2, so 400. Because all our objects are going to be these measurements, so then they are always going to be on the grid. Another thing I have is up here, shortcuts. We can have the same thing as I do in Maya, jump up and down with the grid. So if I put up the grid now, I jump up and down here. So let's quickly just name all of these and get them into engine. So I'm going to be, how should we set the texture density be set of the UV for modularity? So we can quickly talk about it. Basically, our UV editor has the same kind of like grid, right? It's a 1 by 1. And that's kind of why we want to work like in meters. So for example, if I quickly just auto UV map this, I'm going to probably just do the wall here. If we set our texture density to be 512 per meter basically. And this number is basically just defined by the type of game we're doing. So if we're doing a game where we need less resolution, maybe it's like a third-person game where the camera is a little bit further away, so we don't see the textures as much as we would do in a first-person game. This number can be lower and higher. So for a first-person game where we are very close to the wall, we might have to have that on 1024. And this number is usually set in the beginning of a production, basically, and then we just follow it, so we don't change that number. And then the map size is just the texture we're going to use for this. What is it? Is it a 1K texture? Is it a 2K texture, etc.? So if I click here now and I UV map this, so let's straighten this. I use this orientation to get it to kind of like be on the correct measurement. If I click this now we get the correct texture density. And what we can see here, because we are on the grid 4x4, it tiles 1, 2 times. So it's going to repeat perfectly. And then, of course, like we talked about, like upwards, right now it's going to be on a half. So we know that the tiling is not going to be kind of like working if we would do that, for example. But we know that this piece is going to kind of like always be on the floor. And that we had the balcony being above here, basically. But for example, if we would have like an extra piece here, we would maybe put that on this space then, if that would need it to be here to tile. So we're gonna look at the game exporter. So we're gonna see how that works. So I'm gonna take the other. Do we usually double the size of texture value for the map size? So let's see. So right now, this object is basically each pointer is pi 12. You can think like 1 unit is this number. So to tile this properly, we would kind of want to be on this number, because it's this 4 times becomes this number, basically. But I don't want to go into too much the text density, because we are not going to be able to get to all the modularity. But I think like text density, we might do like a separate talk for it, because it's such a big kind of topic. So I would say we're going to kind of focus on that completely on a talk. I would say like this. You might get like a text density set on your art test and stuff like that. I think the important part to remember is just to set the number correctly here. I could recommend also not to have to wait too long. This is really good breakdown of text density on a slide, basically. So I would recommend this one. If so you don't have to wait for that demo. I think Dynasty also did a talk on text density that I would recommend. Dynasty like that. Here, this one. I might link this one. And this might explain it in the meantime for you. I'm going to link these two for you. So let's talk about the game exporter now. So there was a question about importing as groups and stuff like that. So we're going to look at that now. So I'm going to just name all of these now quickly. So we have window, wall, and this is like a wall piece that is 2 meters tall. It's 4x2. Four by 3. And this is, of course, not so fun and sitting and just kind of naming stuff. But we only need to do it one time, and then the names are going to be here. and we can just not have to think about it. So it's kind of one time thing, and then we have the name sets. So when it comes to like the height of the roof, it's not gonna kind of tile more upwards. Then we don't need to be as kind of exact being on kind of like a meter. This is still, I don't know, on the grid. Like I would kind of for consistency having that kind of like on the grid still. But having it kind of snap like this, we don't need because it's never going to do that. So this is our end piece basically. So upwards here is a little bit more free. But for example, here, like these might, for some reason, kind of snap with each other. And then we could have a wall with a bunch of doors, for example. So upwards or modularity is always when it ends like a roof piece. We have a little bit more freedom. But we still want to keep consistency on the modularity on the sides because these are going to snap to the side, right? So this one is 4. And you can add a 3 here just to have kind of like 3 meters tall. And this one is a 1 meter, 1. Then we have this one, and this is just kind of like a sign, I think. We might add like a prefix for the sign. Sometimes it can be nice to add like what type of sign it is and stuff like that. Sometimes we can add like if it's small or medium or big, like those prefixes can always be. But for this scene, we only have one sign, so I'm just going to keep it at sign. Now we have all these named. So the first thing I'm going to just do is kind of get them into Unreal. So I'm going to export all of them. And re-import everything here. And I'm going to quickly just assemble everything here. So here's the first thing, like to get these to kind of fit correctly, we can negative scale like this. We're just flipping the 0 here. This might cause problems sometimes if we do it too aggressively with our player collision. And player collision is basically what is the player gonna interact with. So that can be very good to know about if we're scaling basically too aggressively. Add this piece. And we can see already, like, I don't have to think too much to make these fit because they are all on grid. And I can go down to like just being on like 2 by 2. And then they're gonna like very nicely snap here. I'm holding in Alt, drag to duplicate and move at the same time. So I think I missed the balcony actually. So we're gonna add that in. We have it here. I like to like put everything on a kind of line like this. Export that one. And I always have like Maya and Unreal open like this and work between them. So it's very easy that some pieces are not working and we need to fix them. That's why it's always nice to have both softwares open and kind of like address the problems when we see them. So there was a question about group export and doing it in a Maya group. So we can do that. So I'm going to actually show that. So I can actually separate everything here. Every object is loose here. And let's say I just want to kind of like focus on these because I want to just show this. So I'm going to scale these basically. I'm holding in control middle mouse to do this type of scaling. And then I put it back to this group. And I can actually export this group. So I don't have to have everything combined. The group has the name. And that's because I have export multiple files here. Now we got a little bit of a weird bug there. So that's probably the freeze transform. So, and if I freeze transform now, it's kind of like happens this. And that's, we need to delete the history. I would say like after a while, you just get used to delete history like all the time and freeze transform. Just part of Maya basically. So if something acts up, it's basically one of those two. And now we have this piece. I would say I just do it like all the time, basically. It's basically muscle memory. But I would say like a good rule can be like when exporting, I would say, or when ending a function. A good example of that is if I use this script here to create a corner like this, I can move this, but this one is still connected. And the only thing that kind of disconnect these two, like if I delete, this happens. The only thing that fix this is to delete the history. If I delete the history, now they are disconnected. So that's one kind of place where we want to do it. But then I would say like always when we're exporting towards Unreal, basically. So I'm just looking for the grid snap here. And just because we set up exactly like Maya here, like everything is just gonna kind of fit into place here. I move these pieces. I actually set up some cameras here so we can see. So I need to move these. Okay, these are not aligned now, so I'm gonna fix that. I want them on the same grid, I feel like. Because I can take all of these and just grid snap like this now until that ends. Is there a guideline on how to model corner pieces for modular buildings? That's a great question. I think we should grab that question and show it. So basically like corner pieces, if we have two walls like this, it doesn't become that nice in the game, like putting them together like this, because we get like a very sharp line. So what we tend to do instead is we build a corner piece like this, because then we can bevel it. Like we can't bevel this. We could kind of like put stuff on top of it, but it always becomes a little bit tricky. We tend to have these corner pieces where we can kind of bevel this to get a smoother line here. And in the engine, this will render much better. And when it comes to like the thickness, like usually it's nice to have them on a meter tiling wise. I would say sometimes I can put these on a half meter, but then we have to cheat a little bit with the textures. It depends a little bit on the type of building, like how close are these walls going to be to the first window, etc. But they're usually on a meter and a half meter. And to see this, we can open back up. I think they have it in this one shows it quite nicely. So here we have those corner pieces. And these, I think, are, for example, a half meter. Looks like that, at least. But yeah, so it's very nice to do these corner pieces to always get like a smooth corner, basically. I hope that answered that question. I'm going to take 2 of these to move faster, and then 4 of these. So I'm holding in Alt and drag here to copy. Here I can see something not lining, so I want to kind of investigate why. This is why we want to kind of sit here and Unreal and assemble everything before moving over. Kind of check where this is not lining up. I'm going to just check against this piece. That's correct. Let's try to connect these again and see. Yeah, now it fits. Here it doesn't fit. The beginning here, it's probably something wrong with. We didn't see it here. So that's. Now we have this piece. You can see I can just drag drop them and then just move them. They're going to just snap into grid. And I move this closer. And you can see here I'm jumping in the grid. And when flying around in Unreal, that can be a little bit awkward in the beginning. I tend to like use scroll wheel a lot to move faster and slower. And that makes kind of the camera work a little bit easier. Another thing I do a lot is clicking F to focus on objects. If I want to kind of like focus in on this, and I'm holding in Alt, left click to pan around, and right click up and down to move in and out. I would say that's kind of about it when it comes to moving around in Unreal. But that's like in the beginning, like I said, I remember myself how kind of like awkward it was because it's a little bit different from Maya. So that's why I always recommend to try to be a lot in Unreal. Like the more we are in Unreal, the more kind of that becomes kind of like comfortable. And in the end, when we work on video games, we are going to be in a game engine. So getting used to that is part of it, right? Now we have this piece. It's going to check the camera if we're covering everything. It's like a little bit here. I think we have trees there, but I'm going to just fill that in also. I think I did the same mistake here, no? Like that. So everything fits here perfectly. And it's always a nice feeling when we have assembled everything. So the first thing I'm going to just do is give everything here a texture, like a blockout texture. So when working, I like to set up these blockout materials. They are basically built here in the master. I'm having a color here and a roughness slider. They are parameters. And then I have a bunch of these different colors. So the question was, what is a master? So that's basically, you can see that's the brain of the material, basically. I can actually set up one of these to show it. So we do stands for master material. And then color, we're going to do 2 because I have already that one. And the only thing I want to do here is right-click, promote parameter. So now we're creating a function, or basically we're saying to the master that this function, or this node I want to be able to alter in the child of the master. So instead of jumping into this window all the time, especially when this becomes very complex, we right-click, create material instance, and we have these simplified versions. And if I say, like right now, it doesn't have any functions, but if I save this with this added parameter, I get this option here. So this becomes a cheaper way of quickly altering a material, basically. And here is where you add all the textures in, basically. And with this setup, it might seem a little bit like not that complex, but when we add a lot of complexity to this, that's when this becomes very useful. But I mean, I always have these colors when starting out. And it's quite nice to have all of these colors up and running when starting a new scene. Because I don't want to add a bunch of textures in the beginning. I want to work fairly clean. So like we talked about, just focusing on shape in the beginning. Because if we would start adding in textures, we have one new problem to solve. Then suddenly we need to think of UV mapping. We need to think about maybe the textures breaks somewhere. So we add a new thing to solve. And right now, the only thing we want to solve is basically getting the kit pieces to work correctly, and then start kind of like figuring out like how do we add more detail to the models, basically. That's kind of the first thing we want to focus on. Then we move over to texturing. Then we focus on the problems that appear there. So I always kind of try to create everything in gates, basically, and staying in them until they are done. We had a car here also, and a statue. Can start adding those in here also. So with this car, I'm going to put the pivot on the bottom. Because then I can kind of scale it. And I'm going to show also another reason why. So I'm going to do car. I'm just going to kind of put that in the kit folder for now. But I would kind of separate these into a prop file at some later state, so I wouldn't have them here in kit. So here in Unreal, I'm actually going to add the car into a prop folder instead. And then later when working on these, I would have like one Maya file for all the props and one Maya file for kind of like the kits. Now I can just kind of place this where I have it in the blockout. And the reason why I kind of want to keep the consistency with the blockout is that when I do a blockout, I set up these cameras. So we have the focus on the kind of statue here, for example. We have the main shot, so we have like the forest, foreground, and then we have the entrance. So I usually try to figure out my shot compositions while doing the blockout. And then I just have the blockout as a stencil for placing the objects here. I kind of try to place them as actually closely as enough as possible. A couple new questions. So how much modeling detail should we model into the pieces? Like what ratio should we keep in mind between texture and modeling? So I would say it depends on the game. Like what type of game are we doing? I would say nowadays, polygons are not that expensive anymore. So I would say it's better to add a little bit modeling, like an extra piece of modeling, just to get it to be more detailed, basically. And one thing I would think about when doing modeling is like really looking at the reference when it comes to sizes and stuff like that, and really trying to copy them. Especially if we do something realistic, it's very easy to just kind of model a little bit quickly, and not looking really at all the kind of like in and outs. For example, on a window, there is quite a lot happening in a window. And if we model all of those kind of in, I usually think in terms of almost like how is this being produced, and trying to like remodel it like that. And that way it feels very kind of like built together instead of just modeled. I add quite a lot into modeling. And I would say if we would even use nanite, then it's even a less problem. But I would say even without the nanite, we can do quite a lot with modeling. But then we can always kind of work with them together. So a good example is that if we have a brick wall and we had a corner, we could model out brick pieces from that tileable texture and place on top of the wall. So we can work together with the textures and the wall modeling, basically, to create more detail. So master and material instance, what is the difference? So basically master is the parent, like the brain, and the material instance is the child. So all like you're building like all the functions in the master, and they appear in the instance. And when you work in a studio, it's very important that we don't do too many different materials. So usually it's set by a tech artist. And it's a way also to not make artists being able to kind of touch things that they shouldn't be touched. Because with a master, we can define kind of like which options should be open in a material instance. So it's kind of like you're simplifying and make it artist friendly having the material instance. Have you had any interesting experience with repurposing kits from previous projects, or purchasing kits that you could speak on? Any tips or complications? So I have kind of like a lot of Unreal Marketplace scenes and stuff like that, but I tend to always build everything from scratch. And it takes longer, but for me, it's more about just becoming faster at modeling. I think it's totally fine to like build with stuff from Marketplace, but I would say in the beginning, I would just kind of try to just model and getting faster, because it's about like doing it over and over again. So I tend to do a couple of these scenes sometimes, and maybe just taking it to this part, just get faster at this part of the whole environment art piece, or being an environment artist. So I have a lot of these kind of blockouts that I can jump to. And if I get kind of eager to work on one, I can just jump into them and work on them. So that's kind of my view on it. And I would say usually like modular pieces kind of keep the same consistency, but you can sometimes can run into that they might use a different type of metrics. I actually saw that looking at Fortnite, they use a complete different metrics. So they actually use these numbers. So that's kind of like studio depending. And might ask why they use these numbers. They are basically just picture size. I would say for me, at least, it becomes a bit too kind of cumbersome thinking like this. Probably very nice if you have all the tools set up and it really works for them. I would say it's most common to do a little bit what I showed, like working in just flat meters, because then we can kind of like think a little bit easier. But what I want to show with that is that every studio has kind of their workflow. And usually when you come into a studio, you always get time to accumulate or get used to it, basically. From a character art perspective, I wanted to know about inverse cinematic. Could you like rephrase that question? I don't totally get the question. It might be that I'm also not a character artist. Like what are you trying to build like an environment for having in your environment scenes, or what is the question there? I want to also add when it comes to like these scenes and stuff like that. One thing I would really recommend is like there is a bunch of these that are sometimes free, and it's a really good practice to jump into these, especially the one maybe created by Quicks and stuff like that, and just jump in and see how things are being built. So we can always learn from that. So if we jump, so Fab actually has viewer here now. We can jump here to 3D and then just check here, and there is quite a lot of things that's free here. And I learned a lot when starting out, sometimes buying, but also picking a couple of free ones here, and just looking how a professional are building. For example, now Martin Hoff, who have worked at Ubisoft for a long time, has one of his scenes for free right now. So I would recommend everyone to check that one, for example, out. He has really good practices when he works. You have also Decagon, who is quite famous. They have a couple of ones that are free that can be nice to jump into. So we are basically in the end point, but I'm gonna extend like for like 30 minutes. But if people need to run and stuff like that, remember everything is gonna be recorded, so you're not gonna miss out if you have to leave. Okay, so that's being usually, I think, driven by visibility collision. So I think it should just kind of work nowadays quite nicely. So the only important thing there is to, of course, set up your player collision. So we have I can actually jump in here and maybe try with the character. I'm gonna actually go here to play and current camera location instead. And I'm gonna just fall through right now, and that's because our whole building is, or our whole block out is basically one collision, and collision is what the character is running on. So a nice trick when doing blockouts is to jump here and jump into the blockouts whole file here. So I work with it completely like scene like this to kind of figure it out, and then we are making small pieces. But it can be nice to be able to run around here. So I write complex here. Switch that to use as complex. Just using the blockout as a collision. Of course, we don't use this in the end when we are having the finished product, but it's very nice when we are blocking out and trying things, because now I can run around here as a character. But you can see this car has very bad collisions. So we are not even getting up on this one. But this one has quite nice collisions. So the speed should kind of connect quite okay with this. If this is what you mean. And that's basically because we have, so maybe even just do this when you want to really just have a really nice collision between your animations and the world. But in the end, like you want to probably set up clean collisions. Sadly, we're not going to have time to look into that. But that's a whole topic, another topic, basically. So I think I added a statue also. We'll jump to that one. That one, I want to put the pivot here. Really great questions, everyone. I must say. Oh. For now, I'm just gonna build this whole floor like this. We could also just use the landscape tool so I can show that. So if we go here to landscape, this is the landscape tool. We don't need that big of a landscape. We can make it maybe 15 by 15. Like our scene is quite small. Now we just create it. And now we have a landscape floor. And this we can kind of sculpt. If we would kind of use mountains and stuff like that. And there is some cool brushes here to create erosion and stuff like that. And then when you see like these kind of epic mountains and stuff like that from like Red Dead Redemption, stuff like that, that would usually be driven by a texture, like a height texture that we just apply on top of here, and it defines kind of like all the crevices and stuff like that. Feel free to do that. And like I said, like if you might come up with a question that you forgot to ask now, you can always reach out to me either on ArtStation or LinkedIn. Or if there is a question that you feel like, you don't want to ask here, my DMs are open. And I'm happy to try to help with anything. So yeah, we have the trees. So these are the beautiful blockout trees. I tend to kind of like keep them fairly simple. And in the beginning, I just do these balls basically and place them until I'm happy with like the shapes. So if we go back to blockout, I'm kind of just figuring out the shapes of the trees, but let's kind of like build one tree that we can place around. I'm gonna probably take this weird piece, make a tree out of it. So when tree comes to trees, we don't need to like perfectly grid snap anymore. It's an organic asset. But it's still nice to kind of like kind of look at the grid and think of thickness and stuff like that to make it accurate. Kind of want to have a character also. So that's something I always have in my Unreal scenes or Maya scenes, is a character to kind of like cross-check. But that I did a lot too during the blockout. I always had this character to just kind of put them next to the door and window to just feel if it feels right. You all can see that I have startup here. And what that means is that these objects I have kind of when I start up Maya, basically. And to set that, you basically just set up on Maya scene, save it down wherever you want. And then here, new file, you can actually enable default scene. And I have a Maya default scene. So every time I start Maya, I have a character and I have some lighting. It's quite nice to not have to always import that, basically. So for blockup, it's better to do Unreal or Maya. So I jump between because I would say I'm faster to do it in Maya, but I try to become more comfortable with the modeling tool in Unreal. And I would say if you are new to Unreal, I would probably recommend to just use Unreal as much as possible. So I would maybe build a little bit of the block out. So I have an example of that. You can just jump to that quickly. Like, which project is that? It's this one. So I would say like it's more of a preference thing. Like production-wise, you would do what you are fast at. But I would say like it's very important to use Unreal a lot in the beginning. So then it might be nice to just kind of like do the simple block out in Unreal. But also like the nice thing is that then you can kind of like block out towards your camera setups and you can figure out things a bit faster. And then you can just export that block out. I can actually show that. So in this project, I have just that. I think this one I built in completely here in Unreal to try it out. So you can even like sculpt rocks and stuff like that. So it's a very powerful tool nowadays. And you can do like extrusion and booleans and stuff like that. So, like I said, a little bit awkward, but after a while the awkwardness disappear. And what I would do now, like if I would keep working on this project, I would search up here for static mesh. Just select only the static meshes. Select this, export selected. Click out all of these. Don't want like to import collisions, stuff like that. So you mentioned in previous class that you switched to Maya. So it's the hot topic in the environment. I would say they are good at different things. I would say like they have like things I like with them both. I'm quite torn, to be honest, between them. So I kind of like just the openness of Blender and how many kind of plugins and how quick it evolves. I would say with Maya, I really like kind of the sturdiness of just how to box modeling and how to UV map. So I would say like it's a hard question for me to answer. Like when I do concept work, or for example, the previous two studios I worked at, like Ubisoft and Fall Damage, we used my Blender. So I use Blender every day. And then at school here, I always use Maya. And what I did was basically setting them up so they are fairly similar between. So Blender is quite optional in changing it, which I like. I just made them to be more similar to each other so I could jump between them and work without having to rethink navigation, stuff like that. But then usually the question come up with industry standard and stuff like that. I would say Blender is super industry standard now. Like I said, I used like our whole environment team at Ubisoft used it. So I would say it's in the industry. So it's like you can learn with Blender or you can learn with Maya. Like both are fine. I would say the big caveat with Maya is that it's very expensive if you don't have student license. Yeah, I would say like the modifier stacking, is wonderful in Blender also. When I do like concept artwork, I use Blender usually. And then when I do more of this stuff, like a little bit more rigid UV mapping, modularity, I kind of prefer Maya still. I would say, like, if I would just sit in Blender, I would just get into it, like probably also with Blender. So I'm quite open for both, I would say. But yeah, I just want to show here that I do import, and I would just bring in this block out here and work from it here, like this. And to fix this camera problem, we go here, increase these numbers. So that would be kind of like how you take this to Maya. So yeah, let's fix the tree. I mean, some studios still use 3ds Max and Modo. So I would say at some studios, you might run into that you need to learn a new software. And I think it's important to be open for that. But then other studios are quite open for you to use kind of whatever you want to use. But it can be good to be ready for that. Some studios are harder on the rule. I would say usually a studio has one software they cannot develop plugins for. So if you don't want to be let out from those plugins, you basically kind of learn the modeling tool they are using. Yeah, kind of, I would say. Like that's the big caveat with Maya. It's very kind of like rigid in that, like old school in that way. But then I like I said, we starting to see like hard surface artists started using CAD softwares instead. So they are moving completely a little bit to that, like plasticity, for example. And no worries. And like I said, the recordings are going to be there. So I'm going to go for maybe like 20 minutes more because I feel like we want to kind of get to the finish line. But I really appreciate all the good questions. That's kind of the main reason why I'm here. So you guys can get the answers to those. So plasticity is a so-called CAD software. So you would see that in like industries that are doing kind of like more perfect aligned stuff, like industries where you build machines and stuff like that, that needs to be on the millimeter of correctness. It's also not polygons anymore, so you don't have to worry about things break, basically. Like polygons are very easy to break. And with a CAD software, you are very fast on modeling, basically. So we can see here, like very accurate, and it's very kind of clean. So it's more of a like a production tool for like phones or design. But that's kind of what they do when they do like weapons and stuff like that. So we used it a lot on the latest game I worked on, like the weapons artist there. So to create like really good sci-fi props and stuff like that is very nice. I would say as an environment artist, it's not the most software. So it's more if you would be a weapon artist. Yeah, I would agree. Like I'm not the biggest fan of how kind of destructive Maya is. And like I said, for me, it's mainly like when I do like kit pieces and stuff like that. But then it's basically also a little bit because most students use it here, so I kind of like put myself where it's needed. So we have a question about Houdini. So I would say I would probably not jump on Houdini if you haven't built maybe one or two scenes. Like you want to have the fundamentals first, just being able to build a scene, because Houdini has like a lot of complexity to it. So I would just kind of with all the simplest tool you have, build something. And then if you're really into more technical solutions, you can always kind of explore Houdini. And I would say I usually see an environment team in two brackets. You have the technical environment artist and you have the more creative environment artist. And both are needed. And I would just kind of focus towards one that you feel like you are. So for example, I'm more of a creative environment artist. I've of course been in Houdini. I've learned kind of the foundation of Houdini, same with materials in substance design and stuff like that. But I would say it's not where my core skills are. My core skills are more just art fundamentals, being able to do compositions, storytelling, stuff like that. And that's kind of what I'm harnessing, like really focusing in on. But then always do a little bit of technical stuff on top of that. So I think it's always good to be curious about both sides. Here I'm going to do, we have a big tree. Yeah, that's true. Usually you get that from the car companies. In the past, it was a little bit tricky with licenses and stuff like that. But nowadays, it's almost like a commercial for them to be in some games. Look, we have our beautiful blockout tree here. So we could place it like this, or we could actually add it as a brush. And it's going to show that. So we have foliage type. I switch to foliage mode here and add in the tree. And I can add different scales on the tree. So I can do that some are going to be a bit smaller and some are going to be a bit bigger. Now I could paint just the trees here instead. Now they are very dense, so I'm going to kind of lower this number, make the brush a bit bigger. Still very dense, so let's do 1 maybe. I like that. We can brush out the trees instead. I like to switch here to single and just kind of paint them out like this. And the reason why we want to do this instead of placing them, they actually become one mesh. So they're all combined, so they render much better. And it's also a little bit more fun to be able to paint out the trees. Like Bob Ross would do with the clouds. I'm kind of looking at the composition and trying to place them nicely with that. So I want a foreground tree here. Maybe something like this for now. This is a bit too obvious. I feel like I want a little bit difference between these two. I can jump here to viewpoint and kind of move here and paint with kind of this view a little bit easier. So some other questions. Is it also so I would say like I said, I would say in our team we were two. It was two or three more artistic environment artists that drove that part, and then we had two that are more technical, and both are as important. So I would say it's important to have both in a team, and I would kind of focus on the one you are feeling kind of most comfortable with. But then I think it's also important to be curious. So for example, during spring, I started to try to build small indie games, basically to learn blueprinting, just to kind of start understanding programming a little bit more. And it makes me easy for me to talk with, for example, a designer or a programmer, if I can a little bit understand their language. It's easy to know what to ask for them. So we painted out a little bit of the trees. I can actually select this one goes into the walls, and I'm going to move that out. So I missed a lot of question here, so I'm gonna. Yeah, exactly. So kind of that. So I would say it's not a real title. It's more like some environment artist in the team might build the tool sets for you because they kind of work with them. So for example, in our team, we had Martin building all our Blender tools because he was using it with us as an environment artist. So it was easy for him to know what we needed. We spoke the same language. Or you have maybe an environment artist that are using Houdini to do like procedural stuff. And usually those are maybe building the kind of function for it, and then all the other artists are using that function. So technical artists are quite broad, I would say. Very hard to define them as kind of like one thing. Like some technical artists are more tool creators. They would sit and build tools for the different art teams. Some technical artists are more like maybe pure material artists, so they would build just the kind of like material functions. For example, we might need a really good leaf shader here to do the Ghibli style. Then that technical artist would set up that so it's cheap rendering wise. The environment team might build it like the first version for a visual flair, like how we want it. But then the technical artist would clean it up and make it render nice enough for the end user. Yeah, I mean they are so important for a team. Like without them, things would not run when we're playing games. And of course, it's tricky for them because they are on both sides. They are both on the kind of programmer side and the art side. So they always are a little bit like in between two sides, basically. And that can be a little bit tricky for them sometimes. So I'm just filling in that door for now. We might just extend it so we see that whole pathway. So if you are into Houdini, I would. There is a really cool artist that does. I think it's Simon. This guy is doing really cool stuff with Houdini. I would check out him if you haven't. Like all of these posts are really cool. We also have Magnus Larsen. He does a really cool stuff in Houdini also. So here we can see a little bit like Houdini in production. So this is for Ascent, which was a really cool game made by, I think they were like 4 artists or something like that. And the only reason why they could do that with so few artists was that they did all of these tools. So this was created by people that worked at Machine Game, people that do Wolfenstein, and then they started their own studio and built a game with a very few team size. But yeah, here we can see a little bit like Houdini. So creating variation very like nicely, like modeling this would be impossible time-wise. So question about like what is the most needed? Like I think you answered. It's always depending on the studio, kind of like size, like what is the lineup currently. So when I was recruiting for the past studio for the environment team, in the beginning, it was like we only had we had one more on the creative side and one more on the technical side. So I added one of both basically. So it's always kind of like depending on what the team size is. And I would say also usually like some people grow into different roles. It might not always be defined by like the hiring. Sometimes as a junior, you might just join as an environment artist, and they see that you're really into Houdini on your free time, and they might give you some small tasks. So, for example, I saw that one of our artists could program and do Blender plugins. So I kind of let him do that on work time, and then we start to build our tools basically. So depends a little bit on how the studio is set up with the leads and stuff like that. So yeah, we have kind of like fixed everything with our blockouts. So now we have everything in modular kits. Our whole scene is kind of built by these pieces. So sadly, we are not going to be able to build the whole scene with this stream. But the next step would be basically to sit and starting to detailing a little bit. So for example, for me, these window doors, like if I look at the reference, I can see that some are inner and outer. So I would start kind of fixing that problem. So I would probably move one of these to be above and then one kind of behind like this. So that's kind of what we would start doing now. Maybe start adding the like each like piece here of the roof, and then slowly moving over to UV mapping. So that would be kind of the next step. So I have this small statue. We could add a texture on that. Yeah, exactly. Like it's very few people that get hired as a material artist. I would say it's then it's probably more of a senior person. But in a studio, usually you might need 2 or 3 people that do materials. So that senior person usually need help. And then an environment artist that show that they kind of want to sit a lot in designer and create materials would maybe jump on and help out for vegetation, for example. So question about, is substance designer a must for environment artists? I can say like this, I've never have to use it in a studio professionally. It's always been material artist in every studio I worked that you did the materials. And the reason is like you don't want everyone to create textures because the texture would look very different. Like you want like a core team doing it and focusing on it. But what I would say is it's good to learn because it's a very powerful tool. But you're also kind of opening up doors. So I would say I've kind of learned it on the side. So I use it for personal projects, but in studios I have not had to use it. But the thing I would say, we can always be smart, but you don't have to create materials like from scratch always. Something we do quite a lot is taking existing materials and applying them into Designer and building with them. So for example, picking from Fab, Quixel, and maybe having that as a starting point and then alter them inside of a designer. But then there is studios that don't even use designer. Like I saw on the latest Indiana Jones games that they are completely using Painter. You never know with a studio setup. Some artists use kind of designer here, but I read some discussions in some of these posts where they wrote that they used Painter. Is that I would say that's probably more because they are very used to it. I think still like designer for tileable textures is so much more flexible if we learn it. But of course, everything takes time to learn. So we have to like slowly like add in parts. So what I usually do like when I start a new project is focus on two things usually. So for my next scene I'm building, I'm gonna do this project. I built this building. I'm gonna focus on nanite. It's gonna be one, and then designer, substance designer. So that's gonna be my two focus areas. So I usually bring those into a project. Slightly unrelated question. What does it take to have? You mean like how, like what do you need to become an art director? So I think I have somewhere here I have a slide for. So I'm a Miro person, so I have a lot of Miros. So let's see. I think I have one for studio setup. So let's see. Here we have like this kind of like, here we have a little bit like what type of different roles usually like you can slowly turn into as an environment artist, I would say. One thing that you might see a lot is level artist. That is basically an environment artist. It's just different studio call it level artist and some call it environment artist. But yeah, art director, basically I would say, I would maybe even put this one kind of here, actually. And this is still misspelled. I just fixed that. Principal artist. Spelled like this. So I'm gonna kind of just explain this before we wrap up. So when starting, you become a junior, and then after a couple of years, you can move over to intermediate. Usually it's just called environment artist or level artist. I would say usually most hiring happens with this one. We don't see that many junior posts. I would say you don't have to have industry experience to jump here, but you need to be able to create what people do that are in this role, basically. So usually in job posts, it says like 2 to 3 years for a role. You can still apply to those. And if you have a really good portfolio that shows that you can kind of produce what people would produce that are here, you can still get that role. And then also like, I think usually 6 years, you move over to senior artist. And the senior artist is usually the mentor of the group. So they kind of overseeing the other artist, helping them, teaching, being kind of voice of reasoning, stuff like that. And then we move over to like production. That would be like the lead artist. They oversee like the production, they oversee the planning, make sure that the maybe budgeting is there, like more of a management role. That would be lead artist. And that was always the problem before, like career-wise, to go up as a senior, you had to become a lead artist, and not everyone is really wanting to do that. Some want to just do art. And that's why principal artist was created. That's basically a little bit when you are maybe 10 years in the industry, but you don't want to kind of do leadership. You just want to do art. You move over to more of a principal artist. those artists usually do maybe a little bit more of kind of research for the future. So they are still sitting with a group, but they might also start looking at the next project, like what are we going to build in 2-3 years? Do we need to use Nanite for that? Can we use Nanite for that? And they might build a scene in Nanite just to explore. So they are a little bit of the astronaut, basically, of the art team, and exploring the vast nothingness of the space, basically. And then we have like the art director, and the art director is there to kind of like really make sure that all of these artists are going to the driving towards the correct visual style that we are setting. So they are there to make sure that everyone is leaning towards the same style, basically. And usually some studios have art directors specifically for different type of roles. You can have an environment artist, art director, and then a character art director. And some studios do like just complete art director. And I would say after that, you can also have a creative director. I would say a creative director usually sets this kind of standard for the studio. So if it's a bigger studio, would have a creative director, and they would be there basically to say, okay, we are a stylized studio. What are our values when it comes to stylized? Like, how do we define stylized? Can we make sure that every project we work on is keeping that? And they kind of like are more like studio broad, basically. Yeah, Ralph Gracetta is a good example of a artist who became a art director. So usually, like it's can be, I would say most common is concept artists becoming art directors, but it happens also that character artists, technical artists, even or environment artists become art director. It's more about being able to lead by example and making sure that kind of like everyone understands what the vision of the game is. So being a good explainer, basically. So that seems to disappeared. Outsourcing artists. So I would say outsourcing artists is more like towards a studio that's doing outsourcing. But what you can do is like doing outsourcing managing. So usually we call that managing artist. And that's usually an artist that oversees outsourcing studios. So nowadays we work a lot with outsourcing studios. When we do these giant games, like the new Battlefield is coming, they probably have a couple of different outsourcing studios. And all of these need to follow the art direction, of course, and the managers usually oversee that. So they get in all the kind of props that are being made. They usually are placed in a same space, basically an empty void, where you just look at the props and just making sure that everyone has the same fidelity, but also optimization, and giving feedback back to the outsourcing team. So let's do questions for 10 more minutes, like, and then we're gonna wrap up. So I'm gonna stay here for 9 more minutes. We're gonna wrap up at 50, but feel free to write more questions, and we're gonna just focus on questions, basically. So even if a job post says 1 to 3 years, I would say if it says 1 to 2 years, I would say just apply. But one tip I give that helped me a lot is to be really honest with yourself and looking kind of what the artists that are kind of like just entering that studio are producing. So something I did when starting out was having an Excel document where I kind of bunched all the studios that was in my region. So I used Game Dev Map, this website, And then I can just pick Stockholm here. And then I have every Stockholm studio. And I put this in an Excel document. I put kind of like each section. So I put like what style they're working on, if it's a studio I really want to work on or kind of want to work on, but I should still investigate every studio, I feel like. And then I put a link to, I kind of went into LinkedIn on these studios and looked at the latest kind of recruitments of environment artists. And I went to their art station and I put a link to that in this Excel document. And then I could see before they got hired, what was their portfolio scene. And then I get like a true answer of what I need to be able to produce to get kind of that job. What are some of the biggest mistakes you tend to see from students? That's a really good question. I would say probably the classical one would be overscoping, probably, like trying to build too much too big. I have a really kind of like I've done this example of it. But I want to add to that. I would say being a little bit too kind of like, I think eagerness is good, like really wanting to kind of like enter the industry as fast as possible. But I think being kind of like understanding that it takes time. I think that sometimes takes a little bit time to grasp. So it took me a while to be able to produce what I need to produce to be able to land a job. And I think it's hard to know and see that when you are in the middle of doing it. But after I kind of realized that all of my kind of like trial scenes that didn't work out, and it felt kind of bad not being able to do what I saw other people doing. That was part of kind of the journey, and I think that's something I wish was more known. Like it's fine to not make perfect art in the beginning, and I would even maybe embrace it. It's part of the journey. So I think now when I'm kind of like learning, like for example, I'm learning programming now, or in the past I learned 2D art, like concept art. I knew that the first 1 or 2 years will be really not fun. They will suck. I would be not good at it, but that's fine as long as I do it a little bit every day. So what I did with like 2D art was I did every days. And I mean, for me, that was a really nice outlet. Like every lunch, I painted a picture. And I did that for like 3 years. And in the beginning, like the paintings didn't really look good. And I kind of forgot about it. It became like a habit. And I just did it every day. And I just realized after doing it and like after those years, like, oh, I kind of can paint somewhat good now. So I think like just knowing that it will take a little bit of time, I would say, is a good thing to know and somewhat embracing it, I would say. Yeah, gamejobs.com is really good. I like remote game dev or remote game jobs also. This website is quite nice. I like indie also, so indie games job, something like that. There is a website, this one, quite nice also. And here I would say also, like when we look at this big list, very easy to want to kind of click on Dice here or Embark, like the big ones. But I think just entering the industry is the more important part than going to the biggest one in the beginning. And I would maybe even argue that ending up in a mid-sized studio is probably better for development because you're going to have a little bit more responsibility. How do you think a student should set up the portfolio? So I'm actually going to do a talk on that on one of these live shows. So you're going to get a much better answer then. Like I'm going to prepare a talk. I think we're going to look at some portfolios also. So we're going to probably like set up that, like the first 5 people that send in or something like that, or something like that. We're going to look at the portfolios also, because it's going to be tricky to look at everyone's portfolio. But that's going to be a future talk. But what I would say on that subject is basically the less is more. I think that's it's very easy to just want to have everything you worked on, but I would just have what is industry standard basically. So I would, like I said, look at juniors that are in the industry and what they are producing, and that can be quite like tricky to like feel like, okay, how should I be able to even get there? But we have to remember they didn't start with that scene. They maybe did 2, 3 scenes before that to get to that point. But I would basically just always curate your portfolio to just be the best stuff, because you're always going to be rated by the weakest art piece. I would also like think of like consistency in style. I would probably not jump on stylized and realism at the same time. You want to kind of just focus on one style. It can be good to focus on a studio. I started with like just focusing on Naughty Dog. So when I entered the industry, I had this piece and this piece. These were my only 2 scenes. And what I did to really like push these scenes, I kind of put them next to Naughty Dog stuff. So I was like putting it always like with screenshots with Naughty Dog, and just kind of like ask myself, okay, what, like, is my scene still sticking out? What can I do to make it not stick out? And I even had I had this as a background image, just to kind of, this is the first thing I see when I start my computer. I really want to kind of like get as close as possible. And then of course it's impossible to get completely there, because they are super talented artists that worked for many years, and there are much more people that do these art pieces. But if I can aim for like 8%, it's enough for a uni portfolio. So I did that a lot when starting out. Do you recommend to learn VFX as a skill? I would probably not add it in the beginning. So I'm building a scene right now where I'm learning VFX. So I haven't really touched VFX yet until now, because you always have VFX artists in a studio. But then if you specifically want to do VFX, it's there is like a role like that basically, and I would say they are quite rare VFX artists, but it's a very technical role, I would say. So Christina asked about the bootcamp. So I think the bootcamp technically will start a little bit later. I think they are going to send out information about that. It became a little bit like wrong in the planning. So it's going to start officially on the 13th. But because there was like an announcement they are going to start at 29, I'm going to still have 2 classes basically during those 2 weeks that are going to kind of just be there for everyone that already signed up. So we're going to meet up on Wednesday and Wednesday, the 2 next weeks. And I'm going to figure out a little bit what we're going to do for those days. And then officially we're going to start the course on the first themes, like the 13th of October. So that was a little bit miscommunication basically. So sorry about that. But like I said, you're getting basically two extra class for free. And every class is recorded. Great question. How do you find uni? Actually, I'm a collection person, so I have collections for everything. So I have for vegetation, for characters, concept portfolio. I have one for uni portfolios. So this is my curated list, basically. where I just save junior portfolios that have landed jobs or that I think will probably land jobs. But most people here, I would say probably 90%, have landed a job. So these can be good to look at, but remember, these are not the only ones. I would do the research on yourself also. Like I would go to game dev, check the studios you want to work on, and then go to LinkedIn. So I can open up LinkedIn here. It's not going to pop up a chat here. So I'm going to just show this. So if we take a dice, for example, maybe. I'm going to jump into dice here. I'm going to show soon. That was Liquid Sport. So dice. So let's say we want to work with dice. I would go here to people. And I would search for an level artist, I think they call it. So I usually just write art. Because remember, some studios call it the level art and some environment art. Very confusing. And then I would just click up every artist here that has not lead or senior. And then when you click them up, you basically go into their page. And then we can just see when they started with the environment path, basically. So let's say DICE is their first studio. We know they are junior. Because like I said, like you don't usually put junior as a title. Like it's very rare. So some of these are probably juniors, but they are just kind of environment artists here. So that's how I would kind of investigate juniors, basically. Exactly. So I would really just kind of like look and study, basically. And I think that's another skill I would that I always try to get better at is being good at like analyzing or a reflection, basically. I think what I try to do always in the end of a project is to reflect over the project, not just jumping over to the next project, going back and looking back and seeing what worked and didn't work. When it comes to collections, I have a bunch of collections, like I said. What I can do is I can actually link just the whole collection list here. And whoever wants this can bookmark it. And if you, for example, jump to foliage, we have almost 300 projects with just foliage posts here. And I hoard this. So this is kind of something I update still. So my mornings usually start on ArtStation, where I kind of just add into these collections. So I think, for example, modularity is very interesting for you guys to just see a little bit more about that. So here we have modularity in our prop, for example, like pipes. And then level design is quite interesting. We can see how it looks when we get environments from a level designer. So this would be what you got in Last of Us, and then we art dress it. So we can see it's quite close. And we are basically moving over to halfway here, basically, with this today's stream. But yeah, sorry that we ran over a little bit with time, but there was so many good questions, so I think it was worth it. Like I said, if anyone felt like they were missing on a question or didn't feel like they could answer it or ask it, my DMs are open. So feel free to reach out to me if there is any questions. The recordings of this is going to be there. I'm going to try to set up a recording on the script if whoever wants that. Probably going to do that tomorrow. But other than that, I wish everyone a super nice rest of the week. Probably like a nice weekend. We are close to that. So hope everyone has a good weekend, and I see you maybe next live stream in a month's time. Goodbye, everyone.